Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin the Planning and Development Committee. And we have a number of items on the agenda we will work through. The first, I'll ask if any member of council has a declaration of pecuniary interest. They declare it now or at the appropriate time. Seeing none, the first regular item on our agenda is a public meeting. And I would ask Chris to begin and make the introductions here, and we'll proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a public meeting that's required under the Planning Act, and the applicant is HSC Aggregates, and Jack Van Dorp has been the planner working on the file. And so the purpose of the public meeting is to get a summary of the report that's in the package, and I believe there's some recommendations in the report as well. Mr. Van Dorp will give a summary of the application, after which time there'll be an opportunity of council to ask any questions. And after that, the chairman will open it up to the public and to allow anybody to speak in favor of or opposition to the application. If there's any members of the public who would wish to require further notice of today's proceedings, there is a list to be signed in the back. So at this point, then I'll turn it over to Mr. Van Dorp.
Thank you. So the application that we have before us today is for a quarry. It's a 300-acre quarry proposal. It's located at the north end of Albemarle Township in the town of South Bruce Peninsula. And the quarry, proposed use of the quarry is to extract aggregate and crushed stone products. And the quarry is an above the water table quarry. And we calculated that the lifespan for the operation is probably about 150 years at the rate of extraction that's proposed. But we look at quarries as a temporary land use, and eventually they get rehabilitated to, in this case, a natural use. And they get rehabilitated in this case as well with specific characteristics for the whippoorwill bird species, which exists on the site at present. The application has been underway for some time in order to work through all of the necessary details of it, and the application also requires amendments to the town's official plan and the town's zoning bylaw. And then at the end of those two, plus the county plan amendment we're here about today, if all of those are approved, then the Ministry of Natural Resources can issue a license under the Aggregate Resources Act. So when we look at quarries, we look to the PPS. We find that quarries are a protected, or mineral aggregates are protected by the PPS, and the idea is to facilitate their extraction when and where it's appropriate with minimal environmental impacts. We're generally satisfied that that is the case here for the operation. We look to the county plan. We have various location criteria which are met by this application. We have a local plan which also has location criteria that are met by the application. And we have a zoning bylaw which is sort of the implementing tool to permit the use. In terms of the application, the only real details of note are that the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation did express concern with the application. They objected to the official plan amendment outlining concerns about their interests. And those interests particularly would be related to the negative effects and cumulative impacts from aggregate extraction. And they had a concern that there's no formal consultation process in place to meet legal obligations of the Crown to consult with a view to minimizing potential negative impacts. SON noted that a process that provides us with the resources to meaningfully review technical information and identify potential impacts is required. And without this, SON objects to any approval that is granted to enable HSC Aggregates Limited to proceed with its project in our territory. This includes the proposed official plan amendment. SON further notes that until such time as legal duty to consult and accommodate is met, we object to the county's redesignation of these lands. Now, the county has been in discussion with First Nation representatives from SON with a view to improving consultation. However, we don't have results of that at this time at the overall process level. We do note that quarries require approval of the provincial license under the Aggregate Resources Act. M&R had commented that some advance funding had been provided in October of 2015, and we understand at this time that the applicants, HSC Aggregates Limited, are working with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation through the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry on an ongoing basis to discuss potential impacts and the issues that they have with the quarry. And so it's our perspective that we do have the obligation to consult. We also have the obligations to proceed with applications through the process. And so we believe that the county's needs in respect of the provincial policy statement have been met. That our recommendation here is consistent with our plan and our needs under the Planning Act. And so we can recommend approval of the application. If we have the site plan open just a second there, you can see that the proposed operation, although it's 300 acres, and it is divided into 15 separate phases, and each of those phases is divided into sub-phases. And the reason for that is to limit the overall area of disturbance at any given time in the quarry, so that it operates more as a sequence of 20 to 25 acre quarrying activities with rehabilitation throughout. And they've developed plans for stormwater management and internal haulage and so forth. And all of that is to maintain some woodland function in the operation over its entire lifespan, and also to satisfy the ministry's interests in respect of the provincially rare species. With that, I believe we have a recommendation for approval, and we've outlined there that it's to place an extractive industrial designation on the 3 lots that are the proposed quarry.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Does anyone have any questions, Council? Council? Anyone from the public?
My name is Ron Davidson, planning consultant. I'm here with Dave Monroe, who represents Harold Sutherland Construction. I really don't have much to say other than we went through this process, or pardon me, we had the public meeting at the local level a few weeks ago. No members of the public expressed any concern. We've gone through the Aggregate Resources Act. There are no outstanding objectors in terms of agencies or members of the public. The first Saugeen Ojibwe Nations, with regard to that, Jack indicated there's been some ongoing discussions, and there have been. Lately, through Dave, Harold has been working closely with First Nations, and in a couple weeks' time, they will be walking the site again, and hopefully they can come to terms with whatever First Nations is looking for. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Ron. We do have a recommendation before us that the Bruce County Official Plan Amendment Number 1884-1459 be approved as follows. Schedule A, Land Use North Section to the County of Bruce Official Plan is hereby amended by adding a pits and quarry symbol denoting an extraction operation on lands described as Concession 7 EBR, Lots 1 to 3, Albemarle, Town of South Bruce Peninsula, as shown on Schedule A to this amendment. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We had move Mike and Milt. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. We can move on then to the action items. Chris?
Yep, so 3A. So 3A is requested approval by the Committee of the Local Official Plan Amendment that's been passed by the Municipality of Erin Elderslie, and it's Amendment Number 9. The purpose of the amendment is to redesignate certain lands to permit the construction of a home hardware retail store with accessory buildings and storage. As a result of the review at the local level, There's recommendations that the application is consistent with the overall goals and objectives of the county plan, as well as provincial requirements, and there's a recommendation for approval.
The recommendation that the local official plan amendment application, AEOPA number 9, be approved, and that the director of or manager of planning be authorized to sign the appropriate decision sheet. We have a mover and a seconder. Moved by Mitch, seconded by Robert. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
3B. Item 3B is similar recommendation, and this is a local official plan amendment, and you've heard previously from Mr. Van Dorp in relation to the county amendment. The municipality of South Bruce Peninsula, we have 2 municipalities in the county that have plan coverage in the countryside, and the policies in the South Bruce Peninsula official plan are similar. It's very much a status quo plan to the extent if you're proposing a pit or a quarry, you require a plan amendment. So for similar reasons that were found in the initial report and the recommendations to the county, we find that the application is consistent with the county objectives as well as provincial objectives, and we're making a recommendation for approval of amendment number 36 to the Bruce Peninsula official plan.
The recommendation that the Planning and Development Committee authorize staff to begin Phase 2 of the Bruce County North Bruce Peninsula Hazards Mapping Update.
Sorry. Was that moved in a second?
No, I'm doing it now.
Oh, this is the 3B, so that's this one.
Oh, I'm ahead of myself?
You're ahead of yourself by one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, 3B. All right, I'll just read it here. That local official plan amendment application, South Bruce Peninsula OPA number 361459 be approved, and that the director of manager of planning be authorized to sign the appropriate decision sheet. Mover and a seconder. Mike, Mitch, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now we can go with this one.
Yeah. The committee will recall that we've been doing some work in northern Bruce Peninsula regarding trying to get hazard mapping straightened out. And we began the pilot project in Phase 1 with a local steering committee made up of members of the public, county staff, and local staff providing support during Phase 1. And the idea was to come up with some definitions of what are environmental hazards or natural hazards, so to speak, and what are the criteria for mapping them. And as a result of that, there was a joint recommendations adopted by this council previously, and also Northern Bruce Peninsula Council, that we move forward with a Phase 2. And so Phase 2 involves actually going out and hiring a mapping crew to map to the stated criteria, and it is hoped that at the end of the process we'll have one consistent map that represents the county's interests in hazard mapping as well as the local municipality. One of the issues with the mapping has always been level of accuracy. And we do have new air photos that have been flown and some potential there to create what's called a digital elevation model. And it really refines elevations on the land so you can look at detail. We've been working in partnership with the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority to see whether or not they could take the original air photos and create the digital elevation model. And as a result of that, they submitted a proposal to the county and to the local municipality that they be allowed to undertake the work. From a staff perspective and from the perspective of Northern Bruce Peninsula Council, we feel this is probably a good way to go. We've looked at some of their costing, and both Northern Bruce Peninsula and the county has money set aside in our account under the county official plan update account in order to pay for the mapping. The details of the mapping are included in the actual contract. I think that the primary goal, of course, is to get decent, accurate mapping that people understand. And associated with the mapping as well, there's what's called attribute information. So if you click on the map, you can find out, well, who did the map? Where did it come from? Who was the person who authored it? And what was the base map that they used? And so, for example, if they're mapping a creek or a river or a stream, and they decide that, well, it dictates a 15-meter setback for a flood hazard, then it'll show the stream plus the 15 meters. And so when you go to a public meeting, my goal and vision would be able to click on the map and explain to the landowners where it came from the accuracy of the mapping. Of course, the second effect is the mapping using the digital elevation model will have other purposes that can be employed across the county, whether it be for research-based mapping, whether it be for forestry purposes, whether it be to allow people to develop more detailed lot grading and drainage plans, so to cut down on the amount of field work that's required in the field for those types of things. So utility installations, a better set of mapping for preliminary road planning. Is not survey quality, but certainly be able to draw preliminary drawings in terms of road profiles and so on. So the recommendation is then that we enter the partnership with Northern Bruce Peninsula, and we engage the Grace Sauble Conservation Authority as the mapping agent. And the payment for 2016 on our side would be from the county official plan update. In 2016, we have $15,000 there. Most of the money for the project goes towards actually undertaking the mapping. There is some mapping in there in phase 2 in terms of when we begin the official statutory process, then to have Conservation Authority staff, if we choose, to do field checks of people's property. So if they come to the public meeting and they're not satisfied with the mapping, then they go out and take a second look in the field. So there's some additional funds set aside for that as well. So Northern Bruce Peninsula will act as the administrator for the contract, and we simply have to make the contribution towards Northern Bruce Peninsula, who have entered the contract under their existing procedures regarding tendering and contracting.
Okay, thank you, Chris. The recommendation that the Planning and Development Committee authorize staff to begin phase 2 of the Bruce County North Bruce Peninsula Hazards Mapping Update. I need a mover and a seconder. Robert? Paul? Any discussion? Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Chris, how accurate is this mapping? Is it, so I mean, I know we have mapping in Saugeen Valley that is where we purposely impose a 50-meter buffer around that line so that we need to send people out to look at this particular, I mean, and our hope would be that you would be very accurate, that someone from the public, if I'm a landowner, I could look at that and know without having to have going back to the Conservation Authority, say, send somebody out, is this 50 meters this way or 50 meters that way? Because I think that's really important that we provide that information to the public.
So I'll give you an example. Along the shoreline in Northern Bruce Peninsula, hazard mapping is prepared over the years, and it's used as a 1 to 10,000 base map. And these are the old photos from '78 that have been updated and reflown in '83. And they're awesome maps, and they've been digitized, and they show elevations along on the map. So it shows hills and valleys and so on, and creeks and rivers and streams. Along the lakeshore area, typically there's a elevation called the 178, and the 178 GSC is typically been thought to be where the high water mark is, and so they start to use that 178 as a mark. On a 1 to 10,000 base map, that's plus or minus 10 meters up and down. And then if you get into an area such as, for example, Pike Bay or Red Bay, 10 meters could be out at the highway or it could be right at the lakeshore, so it's not very useful. So the new mapping then uses the orthorectified photos, and it's plus or minus 1 meter. And so there's the answer to your question. That's the difference in the accuracy. And then, so 1 meter is technically textbook of what they're telling us. They have used the same methodology to do shoreline management plans over on the other side of Grey County, and they're finding it's closer to 0.3 on the ground. So potentially, it's a huge improvement. It's still, when you talk about regulated areas through the Conservation Authority and so on, I mean, I guess that would be better. And I guess potentially you could reduce your buffers because you would be more certain. And so potentially maybe this methodology could be used by Saugeen Valley or others to increase the accuracy of their mapping. Where the Saugeen Valley would run into issues is you have many older cottage properties with smaller lots. With a smaller cottage, there's a bigger one being built, and still that 1 meter or even 0.3 of a meter is problematic. So they may still require in those situations is that somebody take an elevation to prove, or an engineering study to prove where the line is. So certainly better than what we have for the peninsula with no conservation authority in place. They use a similar methodology in Grey Sauble. Their maps are up on the website, and they seem to work fairly well. So to answer your question specifically, it's a lot better. I would think that it could be used in the southern part of the county to reduce the size of the buffer, but it's up to the regulator to determine, being the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority, how comfortable they would be with that mapping for regulatory purposes.
I think really the thing that I hear often is the frustration of landowners trying to find out in that buffers area, and then we need to go somewhere else, and it seems it can be seems like it's kind of arbitrary then, right? I have to go and that often causes a lot of confusion. If we can have that, you know, I mean, if as a landowner you can specifically say, yeah, I can do this here or not, then it's better for us all.
Yes.
And I know that, just one other comment, it's interesting, we were in Niagara Falls there at that Great Lakes St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, and there's representatives from NASA there, and I was talking to one of them, and they have incredibly accurate satellite photography of the whole Great Lakes Basin, and I know it's available, but I just wonder if that's a help.
Yeah. I think it is, and going back to the idea that with regard to the buffer, though, that's important. If we did a similar project in the southern part of the county, it would have to be coordinated between the local municipalities who have hazard mapping, which affects the issuance of building permits. It affects the county from a policy perspective, and there's also the regulatory line. And so in the southern part of the county, I would suggest, again, if this works, we would potentially undertake a similar project that aligns the regulatory line on the map with the actual hazard line on the zoning schedules. In terms of the satellite imagery, I'm not familiar with that at this point, but I'll bring it up by telephone conversation with the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority staff to make sure that they're aware of it.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Any other questions? Mitch?
I agree with Mike, and I think after we see the final product from Northern Bruce Peninsula, I think this has to be implemented across Bruce County. So that would be my suggestion moving forward, that it's in Bruce County, it's one-stop shopping, everybody has the same access to the same information.
Good. All right, all those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion is carried.
Next item is 4B, and this is an information item as well, and I'm going to introduce Brad Noble, who's one of our staff members within the corporate policy division. We were asked some time ago by the CAO when the federal budget was released, to come out with a report about looking at some of the implications of the federal budget on the residents of Bruce County, business owners, and some of the programs that we run. And of course, we threw up our hands and said, yes, we can do this. This is no problem, simple task. Let's just get our feet wet. I will say that it was one of the more complex reports that we've had to write, because if you actually read the budget document, the federal budget document is more of a marketing piece. There's not a lot of details in terms of, for example, there's an announcement that there's going to be more funding towards First Nations for certain programs. Nowhere in the budget does it tell you the existing funding. It doesn't tell you where the funding is coming from, or potentially it's being taken from another pot or another resource. So other than the taxation side of it, the taxation side is easy to see a share shift analysis. Some people are going to be paying more, some people are going to be paying less. But in the absence of the actual program announcements, we were slightly hamstrung. So what we did is we tried to look at the high level end of it, look at some of the major core themes within the budget, and then we used, in some cases, you recall that we purchased some new software called Environics, and Environics allows us to dig in to certain neighborhoods by postal codes. So we've taken a crack on 3 or 4 occasions here to look at that and drill down in terms of what that could mean for residents within the county. This report also, we did poll some of the directors and so on and asked them how they felt that was going to impact their existing budgets. and that's included in the report. But as you will know, within the last couple of days, it seems there's going to be some major announcements made under different programs that will affect us significantly in the county as well. So I'll turn it over to Brad then, and Brad, you can hit on some of the highlights of that report if you would.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction, Chris, and good morning to the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to report to you today. The following staff report is for informational purposes and, as mentioned, covers the 2016 federal budget and potential impacts that may have on the county of Bruce. One of our roles in corporate policy is to monitor some of these initiatives and to report on them and identify potential implications at the county level. It should be noted, or I guess as Chris alluded to in the introduction, that the federal budget it's a comprehensive document. It's about 270 pages, and it's structured in a way which identifies certain demographic groups, middle class, for example, and it's written, I guess, in common language. With that common language, if you go through it, it is quite difficult to nail down the specific impacts at the county level. So what we ended up doing is at the very back of the budget, there's a table in there that indicates the value of 2016 budget measures, and it breaks down where the spending occurs in specific categories, and we use that as the basis for the report. So we've got figure 1 up on the screen right now, and that's at the broadest level where the spending occurred. On the axis on the left, that's in billions of dollars. So you can sort of see what the breakdown is. We've got housing investment in there, infrastructure investments, significant one. We've got personal income tax measures, which is actually shown as a negative on there, but that one happens to be a shift of tax monies from one location to another, to the middle class. We also have measures for modest and low-income modest and low-income households, as well as some other measures. So I'll break each of these down for you. So first off, we will go to figure 2. This particular one is housing investment. The first category there, the most significant one, is affordable and seniors housing. What that covers is the construction and repair of affordable units, the construction, repair, and adaptation of seniors housing, as well as other affordability measures such as rent supplements. So it is a significant one in terms of cash injection there from the federal level. In terms of alignment with the County of Bruce, this does align very closely. The Bruce County Long-Term Housing Strategy 2010 to 2020, and there's a subsequent update to that, 2013 to 2023, did identify that there were a number of issues facing Bruce County. Those included growing seniors population, increased demand for affordable housing, a shortage of special needs housing, and an undiversified housing stock. Those are some of the things that strategy identified. And if we just scroll back up to the chart there, to the graph, so that first column does align very well with what the needs of Bruce County are moving forward. The only real issue that's identified with this is that in the report itself, it says that 100,000 households would be affected by this affordable housing injection of money. When you spread that across the entire country, 3,600 municipalities, and you divide it up evenly, you're looking at something like 28 households for the County of Bruce. Now that's if you divide it up evenly. Oftentimes that's not the case. They divide it up with population. So it might be even less than that. So in terms of where that funding is going, I think it's a fantastic initiative, but when we get right down to the impact, it might be a bit more modest than it appears. Secondly, the second largest one there, the northern and on-reserve housing, that one there, if we just scroll back up, I'm sorry, Chris, just back up to that chart again, is that that one for northern and on-reserve housing might be an opportunity for the County of Bruce as well. What it supports is the renovation and retrofit of existing housing on reserve. The way that that is distributed, those monies are distributed to Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada as well as CMHC, and they select the projects based on assessment. So that one is a potential opportunity, but it's too early to say whether there might be a specific opportunity for the County of Bruce at this time. Just lastly here, the homelessness one, those funds are distributed through homeless partnering strategy, and in that strategy they've identified 61 communities in Canada. If you go in there and you look at the ones for Ontario, unfortunately, Bruce County is not, or no towns or communities within Bruce County are in that opportunity. So I'll leave it at that for housing investment and move on to the next one, figure 3, please, Chris, which is infrastructure investment. And as you may recall from the first graph, that is quite a large investment of cash. In terms of the opportunities for Bruce, I guess I'll be blunt and point to a couple that are unfortunately eliminated for us. Public transit, as well as the post-secondary infrastructure categories. Public transit one is really more so targeted to the urban centers and upgrading subways, streetcars, and that sort of thing. And the post-secondary education infrastructure is not, we wouldn't qualify for that one either. So where the opportunities remain is federal infrastructure, Indigenous and cultural, recreational, and other infrastructure. For the federal infrastructure, what that really is focusing in on is federal infrastructure. So that's national parks, small craft harbors, federal airports, border infrastructure if we had it, and support the cleanup of contaminated sites. So as it applies to Bruce County, we'd be looking at potential impacts to, now the Wyerton International Airport is not actually in Bruce, but there's potential impacts, secondary impacts from that if there were injections of money to the airport there. We've got the Bruce Peninsula National Park, small craft harbors along Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, as well as contaminated sites. So in terms of opportunity, there's opportunity coming down the pipeline within that category of spending for federal infrastructure. If I skip over to the Indigenous category, that covers a whole range of social infrastructure, the housing, childcare, cultural recreational infrastructure on reserve, as well as wastewater and waste management type infrastructure on reserve, and also included roads, bridges, energy systems, broadband connectivity on reserve. So that is a potential opportunity as well. However, project selection would be required on that one. Lastly, cultural and recreational infrastructure spending. That one covers the renovation and construction of arts and heritage facilities. An application for that would be through the Canada Cultural Spaces Fund. So again, opportunity. The actual impacts are unknown at this time because application process, project selection, and that sort of thing would need to be conducted. Just lastly, on the infrastructure investment front, and it was noted in the report from Highways that there is continued support for municipal infrastructure projects through the gas tax fund, the incremental goods and services tax rebate for municipalities, and the New Building Canada Fund's provincial territorial infrastructure component. I believe Highways just recently released the news that they had received funding for the gas tax fund, which is significant for Highways and forms a large component of their budget on capital there. So that will remain. And lastly, investment. The federal budget alluded to investment in along the lines of $500 million for a new program to extend and enhance broadband service in rural and remote communities. There's specific text in there surrounding Indigenous or on-reserve infrastructure, and it's a little more general and vague at this time for the broadband coverage. But that number of $500 million is in there, so potential opportunity for broadband, not much detail. The figure 4 is the income tax measures. So in this particular category of spending, this is something that perhaps does not have specific implications for the corporation itself, but rather the ratepayers. In this particular one, we've got a shift of tax spending at the federal level. They're removing certain programs such as the income splitting and a number of other programs, and they're shifting it over and giving relief to the middle class. Now, Chris has brought up an interesting graph here, and as he mentioned earlier, we're tapping into the Environics software that we invested in earlier this year. This is an interesting graph in that it's comparing Bruce County to Canada as a whole. So it really, the red line essentially is giving you a bit of a baseline for Canada, and this is for household income. And it does have applicability then to the middle income tax breaks that are mentioned in the federal budget. So what we see from the graph is interesting in that in Bruce County, so the blue line on the left side is basically showing the lower income brackets. It forms a lower percentage of the population than Canada as a whole. So we actually have proportionally fewer low-income households, and this is at the household level and not the individual level, than Canada as a whole. In the middle income, we're about on par, and when you get to the higher income brackets of about 100,000 and above, we proportionally have more of those income earners than Canada as an average. So as this implications from the federal budget is that basically the people on the right are going to get hit with the tax because the tax is increasing for those high income brackets and it's shifting to the middle income. So, so that's basically the gist of the graph is that that's how we compare to Canada. We have more higher income and a few less low income, and we're about on par for middle income. So that's just something interesting that we found and had reference to this particular change at the federal level in terms of taxes. Just one other thing to note there, for the middle income tax cut, that will affect 9 million Canadian earners between 45,000 and 90,000 per year. So it does have far-reaching when you're talking about 9 million Canadians, changes to their taxes. It tends to be fairly significant. I'm going to move to the next one, which is the measures for modest and low-income housing. I would argue that this particular one probably has the most significance in terms of impact. Both, well, at that original graph that we had shown, it's a huge bunch of money there. When we look at that figure 6 graph, it's around $10 billion, and what we're talking about is the Canada Child Benefit. What that is for middle-income families, they'll receive some benefits if you have children, but the maximum benefit is for those families that earn $30,000 and less. High-income families will receive lower benefits than the current system. And as it applies to, I'll just get you to scroll back again. Sorry, Chris, I've got you jumping all around. Just to stay right there, if you don't mind. So just for Bruce County, again, using Environics, we're able to tap into some interesting information. For Bruce County, low-income families compose 17% of all households, and that includes just shy of about 5,000 households. So that have an income less than 30,000. So when we're looking at the impacts, I would say, or one could argue, that 5,000 households is a fairly considerable impact that would be entitled to this Canada Child Benefit if they had children. Other things here is that would be a direct positive impact on low-income families on Ontario Works, living in social housing, and or receiving the child care fee subsidy. So impacts to ratepayers as well as programming that would maybe shift people on and off certain programs. So that is significant and to note. The maximum annual benefit of up to $6,400 per child under the age of 6. So pretty significant there. Other measures in this category, we've got measures for lower income seniors. What we're talking about there is an increase to the guaranteed income supplement top-up benefit. And lastly, in that figure 6 is changes to the employment insurance measures. Those are changes to the program itself, which will do things like expand access to EI for new entrants and re-entrants, reduce the EI waiting period from 2 weeks to 1 week. I won't go through all of the changes, but those are the type of administrative and program changes that are proposed. Lastly, figure 9, we'll just go to figure 9, which is the chart a little bit up there. And again, at the back of the federal budget report, they have this particular chart which shows all of those categories that we've just been through and indicates a coefficient or a multiplier effect which has to do with economic impact. So the main two that are probably the most significant here are the infrastructure investment in 2017-2018 at 0.4, as well as the measures for modest and low-income households. That again is that the child the benefit, the child benefit. Canada Child Benefit. So those are sort of the two more significant ones. They do indicate the number of jobs and that type of thing. As we relate this to Bruce County, unfortunately, inside that infrastructure investment category, we're lacking on that public transit injection of money, as well as the secondary institution injection of money. So we're a little bit more modest on that infrastructure investment, unfortunately. So overall, I would say, and in conclusion, the federal budget includes investment in housing, infrastructure, tax reduction, other measures to support low and middle incomes. Although the spending implications remain unclear really at the local level because it hasn't sort of filtered all the way down through, the county should be aware of opportunities, financial or otherwise, that may arise. So we do recommend that departments stay current on those federally related initiatives and programs as they may provide some pretty interesting opportunities that may improve services or infrastructures for residents of Bruce County. So I'll leave it at that this morning, and if I'll pass it back to the chair if there are any questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Brad. A lot of interesting information in there for sure. Any questions or comments from council? Yes, Milt?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I agree with you. I think this is a good service that we're being provided here to inform us about the opportunities that may be available to us in the future. So I appreciate the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank
and
you.
Look forward to more of them, of course.
I have a question pertaining to the Wyerton Airport. You'd mentioned that there might be some funding available. What would that be under, transportation? Because it's not a federal airport. Is that under the transportation portion of this, or I'm just wondering?
Yes, so, and through you, Chair, thank you, Councillor. This particular category of funding would be through the infrastructure broader category and then through federal infrastructure. I believe all airports are federally, are a federal initiative, so that would, I believe, technically be under that federal umbrella in terms of its investment.
So all of the municipal and regional airports would all fall under that?
To my knowledge, and just from previous, I guess, planning experience, it's all airports are under federal jurisdiction, even ones that we'd fly into on a lake. The actual airports themselves are a federal body, federal jurisdiction.
They're regulated?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, thank you again. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
All right. We skipped over one item on the agenda, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing appeal. Chris, could you give us
Sure.
some comments on that, please?
Yeah, this is for information purposes, and you recall, we, at a previous committee meeting, there was an official plan amendment, and the purpose of the amendment was to remove a restriction that's typically placed on surplus farm severances, and the idea being if a surplus farm residence is being severed, well then there's no need for further residential uses on the backlands, and typically that restriction's been put in place. And the county plan has sort of had that practice for a long time historically. And then more recently, through updates to the provincial policy statement that was put into the PPS, that development on the agricultural portion is restricted. So it was a private amendment by a landowner who wanted to construct the dwelling, and as you recall, the official plan amendment was approved. And this is an appeal notice from the ministry, objecting to or stating their concerns with the application, and they feel that it doesn't comply with the spirit and intent of the provincial policy statement, and so on and so forth. You can read the reasons in the section. So they've launched an appeal of that application, and I'm certainly willing to answer any questions in relation to it.
Okay, thanks. Are there any questions? Mitch?
Just process moving forward, so they're appealing.
Yeah, so they've appealed, and there was the county plan amendment in place, and also the zoning was in play as well. So zoning approved at the local level, so both of those are under appeal. So moving forward, they've appealed it, and the board would notify the county and as well as the applicant and the local municipality for a hearing date. In terms of how these things normally play out, I like to sort of have two broad categories of appeals and how that relates to the county. And the first is a global amendment to a county plan that has implications across the county, and there's special interest for the county. And in those cases, if something is appealed, then the county may wish to hire legal services and so on and so forth. Many of our applications are simply sole purpose amendments to the benefit of an individual property owner. They own lands, they want to do something with that land that's not currently permitted by the regulation, and so they submit a private amendment. In this case, this falls into, I think, the private amendment type category. My guess is, without reading between the lines, is that the concern from the province would be this offends a basic principle or tenet of the PPS that applies provincially, and therefore they would have a special interest in it, as opposed to good land use planning, bad land use planning on an individual property. So moving forward, I mean, you have a number of options. You could hire legal representation to fight it. I would suggest that maybe that would be the role of the landowner in this case. It is a private amendment. I think that the role of our staff is we basically don't have really any role at the board. In this case, because MMH will have legal representation, is likely that they would provide a summons to compel the land use planner on the file to attend. And if that's the case, they attend and basically provide the same information to the board as they did to council at the time. And the board will ask, what was your recommendation and why? And then there'd be an opportunity for any legal representation to cross-examine that planner. I think in some ways the board the rules of procedures have changed a little bit. It is a quasi-judicial panel. They're supposed to be hearing a hearing de novo, which means really a second rehearing, but they've changed the rules and regulations so that you can't provide new evidence. So the opportunities to walk in there with a planner with a fresh report or some other evidence is limited or constrained. So it comes down to really the desires of the landowner. Really the only evidence that I see going in it would be under subpoena for the planner and the report, and what was your rationale to council, and that would be about it. So in the absence of any other direction coming from council, my guess at it would be is that throughout the public hearing process, I wasn't hearing from council that we need to remove this restriction for all surplus farm dwellings, that this was a special circumstance where there was some feeling that it made sense given the property and the land and other land uses in the area, as opposed to this council's desire to globally remove it across the countryside. And so for those reasons, I would fit it into category 2, which being a private amendment, and to allow the applicant to have his day at the board.
Did the ministry physically go to the site? Or do they just make decisions in London? Or do we know?
My guess would be they wouldn't have seen the site. My guess is that they would look at this one and say, the PPS needs to be read in concert. There's a whole bunch of policies in there, and they would see this as being a higher order policy. I don't know if this is the first application in the province to be approved like this, but we've been sort of testing our colleagues, and there doesn't really seem to be a trend. So that it may have sparked their interest from that perspective. In terms of what's in the mind of the minister or staff, that will all unfold at the board hearing.
Neil?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Chris's summation of the situation here, and I think globally it's not our intent, or nor have we ever indicated it's our intent to change that. So I think that it's up to the applicant to have his day and see where the chips fall.
Okay, any other comments? Mike?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess mine's along the lines of Mitch's, and maybe it's unfair for you to answer, Chris, but I just wonder why this particular, there's got to be lots of severances going on all across the province. Why did they pick this particular one? And I mean, we've amended our plan, other than I guess there's, you can get to the very detail, which you've been very good at explaining. But why would they pick this particular one to appeal? And what would their policy be to say, we're going to pick this one and not that one? Because we amend lots of plans,
I think it's this. It's under C. I think that's it, is the bottom of it. Basically, you can sever the residence, provided that the planning authority ensures that the new residential dwellings are prohibited on any remnant parcel or farmland created by the severance. That's my guess, because that has universal application across the province. Again, without being in their mind, that is likely where that's coming from. So, I mean, their criteria, I've seen other ones that have been approved, and myself thinking that it would likely be a vital provincial interest, and they're not appealed. Could be a change of leadership in the London office, could be change of ministers, ADMs, who it's a long and twisty road to understand what's at the bottom of it.
Okay, any other comments? I agree that that's probably the issue right there, and boils down to not more than one severance on the property for a house. Anything else? If not, that brings us to the end of our agenda, And our next meeting is on July the 14th. I need a motion to adjourn. Milt and Mike, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.